Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you back to the Harvard Radcliffe Institute's conference on gender and politics, navigating power and perception. I want to extend sincere gratitude to this morning's speakers. This array of experts hailing from various sectors shared invaluable insights on the current state of gender, politics, and power. My name is Iris Bonnet. I'm a behavioral economist and a professor at Harvard Kennedy School, where I co-direct the Women and Public Policy Program, a proud co-sponsor of today's conference. In fact, I've had the pleasure of working on this conference with Professor Sarah Bleich and the wonderful team at Radcliffe, supported by the team at the Women in Public Policy Program. I'm sorry I can't be with you today in person. Allow me to share just a little bit about the Women in Public Policy Program, or WAP, as we call it for short. At WAP, our mission is to advance women and gender equity by equipping leaders and change makers with evidence-based strategies to promote systemic change. One of our focus areas is gender and politics. In addition to conducting research, we also offer a political training program from Harvard Square to the Oval Office. This nonpartisan and co-curricular program provides Harvard graduate students with the tools and support they need to ascend in the electoral process at all levels across the globe. 2024 marks the 20th anniversary of From Harvard Square to the Oval Office, and some of the program's almost 1,000 alumni are with us here today. The program's motto is "Seeing is Believing," and research from our Gender Action Portal affirms this assertion. Evidence suggests that exposure to women leaders decreases gender bias and improves women's future electoral prospects. With this in mind, I'm thrilled that this afternoon we will hear from experts from the media. But before that, it is my enormous pleasure to introduce our next trailblazer, Dr. Rochelle Walensky. Dr. Walensky is a renowned leader, showing what it takes for our world to protect public health. She served as the 19th director of the Centers for Disease Control, where her tenure began in January 2021, leading the nation and the world through unprecedented times, facing the largest density of infectious threats likely ever seen in this country. Dr. Walensky is an infectious disease clinician. Her research has focused on HIV/AIDS policy, including cost-effective strategies for HIV screening, treatment, and prevention, both in the US and around the world. Rochelle currently is a senior fellow at the Women in Public Policy Program, a senior academic fellow at the Petrie Flom Center of Harvard Law School, an executive fellow at Harvard Business School, and a spring 2024 Hauser Leader at the Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership. We're so honored to have her with us today.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here with you. I do want to thank the Radcliffe Institute, Dean Brown Nagin, Sarah Bleich, and Iris Bonnet for the opportunity to be with you, and also the Women in Public Policy Program with Nicole Carter-Quinn as to giving me an academic home for the year. I did have some prepared remarks, and it's been so much fun for me to be in the audience and to be able to now, with my prepared remarks, insert some other anecdotes based on some reflections from this morning. You know, as I was looking through the agenda, I thought about how I got my voice heard. What did I do to get my voice heard? And I have always done that through my science. So what I would do is actually get angry at a policy. This policy doesn't make sense. It doesn't make clinical sense. It doesn't make sense for our patients. So how can we move science forward to address this policy? It's $50,000 for people who have HIV to get their HIV treatment every single year. $50,000. I've written about the blood ban for men who have sex with men, and that policy, I'm so delighted, has since changed. And I've written about women who have been excluded from clinical trials, systematically excluded from clinical trials. So it is those things that get me angry that allowed me to do the science, push my science forward, made me angry enough to, at 11 o'clock at night, do more science and not go to bed. That is how I got my voice heard. Sometimes that I would receive the academic phone call that says, we need a woman on the podium, and everyone suggested you. And instead of saying, well, and instead of getting offended, I made it my mission at that point to give the best darn talk I'd ever given, and to make them realize that they didn't invite me because I was a woman. They invited me because I was the right speaker for the moment. And then I would say I've made it my mission to pay it forward and to remind women that wherever you are on an academic or business chain in a leadership position, you have people who are watching you all the time, and you have people, whether they be high school students or undergrads or graduate students, who are watching you and think you've made it, even though you feel like you still have rungs to climb. They think that you have made it, and there's a lot that you could do for everybody who is looking to you for wisdom. I get the question a lot, how did you become the CDC director, and what does that mean in terms of gender? I was going to start this story a little later than I will start it now, just reflecting on the comments from this morning. I was chief of infectious disease at Massachusetts General Hospital. I was the only woman in that position. I was the third person ever to be in that position, and my predecessors had each been in that position for 30 years. I was 4 years into my tenure when we got our first cases of COVID on March 6th of 2020. And it was November, early November, I was November 7th, I believe, a Saturday, and I was on call. And I was gowned and gloved, goggled and masked in a patient room, and my phone rang 16 times in a row, which to me meant there was an emergency. And it was I doffed all my PPE, got out of all my garb, rushed out of the patient's room, and my son said, Biden won. And that was the emergency. He called me 16 times. But it meant for me, from a COVID standpoint, that we were going to be better likely than we were before. That was a Saturday. I was on call Sunday as well. And Sunday evening, I got a phone call from a colleague who had been in the Obama administration working in the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief. And he called and he said, they're looking for people to join the administration in the healthcare space. And I said, what does that have to do with me? And so he said, here's the way to put your CV forward. And I said, I have a really hard job here at MGH, and I am not done with it right now. That job is not for me. So I did not put my CV forward. And then a week and a half later, I got a completely unsolicited phone call from Ron Klain in my office at Mass General. Ron Klain, you may know, was the president's chief of staff for the first 2 years of the administration. And he was calling to ask, if I would be the director of the CDC. Now, I wasn't in the office at the time. I received a message. And before calling him back, I called my husband, and I said, Ron Klain just called me. Now, my husband knows me well, and he said, don't say no. He said, whatever it is he is calling to ask, don't say no. Now, of course, he was reflecting on the fact that he knows I have bad imposter syndrome, and that whatever he was calling to ask, I was very worried I was not going to be up to the task. Of course, this was a monumental task that was being asked of me in this moment, and my imposter syndrome was pretty great. But what I will say is the call to serve was just a wee bit more than my imposter syndrome, which was, in fact, why I chose to make the decision to become the next director of the CDC. And as I said in my nomination speech, government service was actually never part of my plan, and if you look at what the classes I took in college, I would have taken a few more in government if that had been the case. Less biochemistry, more government. But, when you're a physician and you are holding what is called the code beeper, and the code beeper goes off, you run to the code. You don't ask if you're up to the task. And so my feeling was the nation was coding and that I was being called to a code, and my time was not to ask whether I was up to the task, it was to run to the code. Now, as you can imagine, being in the administration, there were frequently times where I was the only woman on a Zoom call or the only woman in the Zoom room. I was really grateful when Dawn O'Connell, the now Asper, was Senate confirmed. It took her about 6 months for Senate confirmation, and she then joined me. She is an attorney, not a physician. And I didn't really always recognize where there might have been microaggressions, because truly my task at hand was to promote the science and to do the right thing, and that was really where I was kind of laser focused. I was told in one Zoom call I didn't know how to read a spreadsheet or to do math. I am a mathematical simulation modeler. That is my research background. I didn't go there. And it was often the case, and I've reflected a lot on this, where in some rooms I would say something and then somebody else would say it and it would gain more traction and more attention. We know that happens to women in the room all the time. When the person who says it after you is Tony Fauci, you have to wonder, well, maybe he has a little more gravitas than you do. And to his great credit, he frequently would say, as Rochelle just said, we think we should consider X, Y, or Z. And so I was always very grateful for that. But truly, this was never about the credit. This was about how are we going to get to do the right thing for the nation and for the world. And again, when I went to tackle an issue, gender was not really the first thing on my mind. I testified in front of Congress 17 times in 26 months. Congress was very divided, and it was a really tough place, and the country was in a really difficult place. And when I started at CDC, 4,000 people were dying a day. So how do you disentangle sort of the challenges that the country was facing versus the challenges that I was personally facing when I was in front of Congress? Really hard to do. That said, it's not lost on me that the 4 college presidents that have been brought in front of Congress have all been women. So there must be some underlying issues related to that I could really not disentangle. I know, apropos of the panel we're going to have in just a few minutes, I will say I also did 100 press conferences. When I started at CDC, we were doing 3 times a week press conferences it was me and Tony Fauci, Jeff Zients, for the COVID response team. The first week or so, I was wearing a blouse. Then I was told, no blouses, just blazers. And the next week or so, I was wearing the only blazers in my closet, and they happened to be all black. And I said, nope, not all black blazers, you need some color. So it's like, February of 2021. There are no department stores that are open to go shop for colorful blazers, right? And not to mention, I didn't have any time to do so. So Amazon and I got to be really good friends in terms of the rainbow of blazers that are now in my closet. And once I got them, you can imagine the Twitter that was responding to the color of my blazers, the color of my lipstick, how much they hated me despite the fact that I changed the color of my blazer. So that was very much a part of my day-to-day. I do want to just end in my last few minutes with a few things that I learned along the way. And that is, the quote that I would say in front of the agency was, which way would you like me to be wrong today? Because that is kind of how it went. You were wrong. There was no good decision, and that people were going to be angry regardless of the choice that you made. And so one of the things I really did learn was that if it had been easy, then somebody else would have made it before me. If it wasn't divisive, then it wouldn't have come to my level. And so part of leadership was, in fact, being able to make hard decisions, to recognize that they were hard decisions, and to not let it get you down, and to somewhat realize that if both sides were kind of equally mad, then you probably hit the right balance. one of the lessons that I bring from clinical medicine, and we think about this all the time, is never worry alone. When you have a patient who is not doing well and you feel like you might have left some stone unturned, never worry alone. Go talk to your colleagues. Go find your friends. Talk to people who are smarter than you. Surround yourself by people who are smarter than you, who have different point of views, so that you can actually get those point of views and incorporate them into what it is that it will be your next step. I frequently get the question, how do you convince somebody to be vaccinated? And the answer is you stop talking and listen. At least that's my answer. And I say that because of what a very wise social worker once taught me when I was learning how to give an HIV diagnosis, which is you tell somebody that their HIV test has come back positive, and then you stop talking and listen. And sometimes that pause feels like forever. But you can't guess what it is that is their biggest fear, what is their biggest concern, what is their biggest worry, until they say it first. And if you don't wait, then you will probably address everything but their biggest fear and biggest concern. So I have talked to people who are worried about getting vaccinated because they got Guillain-Barré from the flu vaccine. That wouldn't have been the first thing I would have considered. But it is something that you can sort of talk about once you hear what their concerns are. I will just say that, and this was addressed early this morning as well, celebrate the milestones, not just the successes, because the pathways to success are so very long, and sometimes that final outcome is not one of success, but you've learned so much along the way, you've made such important connections, and it is so very important that we celebrate those milestones and not just the successes. In my academic life, I kept 2 CVs all the time. This one was everything that made it to my CV, and this one was everything that failed. So that you can actually see that you have grown along the way, that you have learned something in those failures, and that just those 2 things that made it to your CV this year, there were 20 things that didn't, and that this is the reason that you were so busy. And then finally, if you're not scared of your next job, then it's not big enough for you. Now, I was really scared for this job, so it was big enough. But I would say that a very wise mentor once said that to me: don't apply for just a little job. Apply for something that is really, really big and that you are scared for, because you are up to the task. I frequently get asked the question, would I do it again? Knowing everything that I know now, knowing the hate mail, knowing the security challenges that I had, the death threats that were upon me and my family. And the answer is yes, because when you carry the code beeper, you have to answer the code. And so that was like my duty to service, and and I learned a whole lot along the way, and every day of it was hard, but I would do it all again in a heartbeat because somebody was calling and needed my help. And because this is a conference at the Radcliffe Institute sponsored by the Women in Public Policy program, I'm going to end with an anecdote which I don't frequently tell, but which I think is one appropriate for this room. So it's April 6, 2021. I'm 6 weeks into my tenure. I had been down to CDC several times, and I was doing my first Zoom conference from my CDC office with the Association of State and Territorial Health Officers. So these are the health officers from all the states and territories. I was nervous. I was sort of presenting to this screen of 60 people, giving my planned remarks, and my phone rings, and it rings again. Now, my kids don't really bother me that much. They really don't. But this was another one where my phone rang 3 times in a row, and I thought and it was my son, and I said, this kid needs me. And he knew I was 6 weeks into my tenure. He knew what it meant. And so I had the decision, which was to hang up or call an emergency for this presentation that I was giving, or to answer my kid's call. And I picked my kid's call. And I thought, if I go down from CDC because I answered my son's phone call, so be it. So I told ASTO that I had an emergency. I told ASTO that I had an emergency, and my son had been hit by a car. He is fine, but he had been hit by a car. God bless him, he said, "Mom, should I get in the ambulance?" The answer was yes. And he is now, I'm happy to say he is now fine, but I think we do need to set those examples. And so much of what we do in life is a juggle. And what I always say to my mentees is don't drop the glass balls and know exactly which ones they are. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. Let's give Rochelle another round of applause. Okay, so we are now at our last panel of the day. Before we get there, I do just want to let everyone know that we have the privilege of having a lot of guests, and I don't speak French, so I'm going to say this incorrectly, from the École Nationale d'Administration Publique. So thank you all very much for joining us. So you are in for a treat. There have been sprinklings throughout the day of media and gendered narratives, and now we're really going to dive in and talk more about that. And I'm going to invite Vanessa Friedman and Tara Setmeyer to join me on the stage. And as they come up, I'm going to introduce them so you know who we're going to be speaking with. So Vanessa is the fashion director and the chief fashion critic of the New York Times. As she walks on stage, please note her pants and her shoes. Tara is currently a senior advisor at the Lincoln Project and a resident scholar at the UVA Center for Politics. She formerly worked as a CNN political commentator, contributor to ABC News, and GOP communications director on Capitol Hill. She's also a former fellow at the Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School. For this panel, we are going to focus on media and gendered narratives. And I will just say that as we were sitting around and brainstorming the different panels that we were going to have at this conference, we got really excited about this session topic because there is so much power in your visual identity. And that's something we've been hearing a lot about all day. And so over the next hour, we're going to touch on a number of interesting themes. You all are welcome to submit questions throughout. I'll have an iPad in front of me where I can see your questions. You can use the QR code behind me to submit questions through Slido. If you're in the online audience, please use the link in the Zoom webinar in the chat function, and we'll be happy to try to get to as many questions as we can. But thank you all for being here for this last panel. Okay, so I want to start with you, Vanessa. And this first question is, so we live in an increasingly visual time. How is fashion being used as a communication strategy?
Actually, I want to say something first, which is that what you didn't say in your very nice introduction is that I am one of those journalists responsible for all the ridiculous headlines that Jen Lawless pointed out this morning. And in fact, the picture of like Bernie Sanders' hair, and then like the many aviator glasses, and the Pete Buttigieg's ties. That was my story. But what she didn't say is the reason I wrote that story, which speaks to the question, is that it was I think the day of the first Democratic debate of the 2020 election. Right, there were 20 people on that stage. They had 2 hours to talk. Each one of them got maybe 6 minutes of speaking time, maybe 10, right? So they had 110 minutes of standing there silently while millions of people watched them. So what are you going to do, right? You're going to waste that time? No, you're going to use every tool at your disposal to get the people who are looking at you to think something about you, and that is your clothes. Right? That is your haircut, it is your appearance, it is a communication device. It's really not about fashion. It's about expressing identity, manipulating opinion, and influence. And all of us do it, and people in the public eye especially do it.
What would you add?
Well, I would agree 100%. I mean, as someone who is in media, who's in politics, and for years it's been my job to analyze political communication and how you do that. And it's funny that now something as simple, an accessory like Joe Biden's aviators, has become a symbol of dark Brandon, right? It was a counter narrative to something, a narrative in politics that he wasn't up to the job or that he was Sleepy Joe. but something as simple as aviators that we associate with toughness and Top Gun and, police officers and, fighter pilots, that something as simple as an aviator sunglasses is now being used as a political symbol for strength, competence, and almost a joke for something that has become a negative. And so it's just interesting that the way we communicate, especially now in the digital age, where everything is under scrutiny and everyone has an opinion and everyone and anyone can express it to millions and millions of people all over the world with a simple tweet, click, push out video, whatever it is. So we're always paying attention to the visual because we're a visual society, we're visual beings, and that medium, whether we like it or not, we're constantly under scrutiny, and every aspect matters, even if it's something as simple as a pair of sunglasses.
And do you think, let's stay with you for a second, Tara, do you think it's appropriate to be commenting on what people are wearing, male or female, any gender?
I don't know if appropriate is necessarily the term. I think that that's relative. We're going to discuss it because, like I just said, we're a visual medium. So people are going to have opinions. How you present yourself speaks volumes about who you are as a person. And so you can be proud of whatever it is. And then as we've evolved as a culture, different things have been more acceptable than others, like listening to Dr. Walensky talk about her blazer, her blouse, what color. I was joking with Vanessa in the green room that it was cold outside. I had to walk from the hotel. I wore Uggs today. Okay, I left the heels in my room because I said, you know what? It's not about what my shoes are. It's about the conversation we're having. So if someone wants to judge me, fine. But I think we just need to think about, put it in perspective. I think context matters. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. I worked on Capitol Hill, so I'm a bit of an institutionalist when it comes to Congress and wearing appropriate dress. And the argument over Senator Fetterman and how he would wear, sweatshirts and hoodies to the Senate floor, I was like, listen, Senator Fetterman, I'm all for expressing yourself. Put on a jacket and some pants. It's the Senate. It's the greatest deliberative body in the world. I think it's appropriate to show that respect. So is it appropriate to comment on what someone wears? In that context, I say absolutely.
Yeah, because I think in particular, like, he clearly was making very conscious choices about what he was wearing, how he was using clothing to communicate who he was speaking to through his clothing. And if someone is doing that clearly, then they are putting that subject on the table, right? Like, they're making it part of their story. And we only do ourselves a favor by acknowledging it and identifying it, right? The more you understand how your own opinions and ideas are shaped, even if subconsciously, because I do think a lot of this stuff is subconscious, the more educated you are about your own reactions, right? This is particularly true during an election, right? People are endlessly saying, especially when it comes to presidential candidates, right? I like them, or I don't like them. And I'm always like, who cares, right? Like, the question you should be thinking about is, like, can they do the job better than the other guy? But it really is almost a sort of visceral personal reaction. And a lot of what shapes, I like that person, I don't like that person is, do I think they can relate to me? Do they look like someone I want to have a beer with? Do they look like they understand my concerns? And that, like, word look is, really key. Like, we're making those judgments based on, did that guy roll up his shirt sleeves? And, can I relate to that? Yeah. Do I like the cargo pants and hoodies, So
Just not on the Senate floor.
Time and place.
Correct. Oh, and the same goes for women, right? I mean, there's a double standard, obviously. But when Kyrsten Sinema decided to wear a jean jacket ensemble while she was presiding over the Senate, I was like, no. It just because you can be fashion forward, but I also feel that there's certain standards and there's a reason for that in certain environments. And she also is someone who has made very bold fashion choices to express herself. if you're going to do that, I think it's completely appropriate for us to comment on it.
I do think I was going to say also, like, context does.
Yes,
like, it is
100%.
really, really important, so that, you know, often when we're writing about clothing in terms of political figures, public figures, thinking about it, it is because they're in the middle of a very public moment, right? Like, it is you know, they're either on a debate stage, or it's the State of the Union, or it's the White House Correspondents' Dinner. You know, it's a moment when they know there are going to be a million pictures taken of them. And those pictures are going to act as a kind of communication device. And so I think then it becomes kind of fair game in a way that it isn't if it's, you know, they're walking down the street in their private life, right? I'm not writing about, like, what Dr. Biden wears when she goes to teach, whatever, her business. But, you know, what she wears to a state dinner, I think, is a very different kind of situation. And it drives me nuts, by the way, that her office will not talk about what she wears.
Interesting. Well, so given all this elevated scrutiny on public figures when it comes to what they wear, how much curation is happening? And let's go to you, Vanessa. How much curation is happening? And I'm thinking, like, hair, nails, makeup, clothes, shoes, everything.
A huge amount, huge amount. I once talked to a friend of mine who was a political crisis consultant, did a lot of work with the Clintons, and he said, he also did a lot of work with other people. And he once said, you would not believe the amount of time I have to devote to talking about tie color.
Wow.
You know, we could be talking about, like, negotiating a peace process, but no, it's like, it's tie color. Because it is all a tool of getting a message across. And so it really does matter. And, you know, I think, you know, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a moment when the governor of Illinois, I forget which one, Pritzker. Someone found his diary, his daily diary, and there were these little annotations against every single meeting from his staff saying, like, wear the Patagonia, right? Like, wear the blue tie. Because it was
Sure,
like,
it wasn't Glenn Youngkin's diary?
No,
about the Patagonia vest. Oh, okay. Wrong state.
It's like, you're going to a barbecue. Because each time it was like, each thing was geared toward the specific interest group that he was meeting with.
And what have you observed?
Oh, my goodness. Well, those are great examples because it just shows you how inauthentic people can be. And I'm from Jersey, so I'm incapable of BS, and sometimes it's a blessing and a curse. But, you know, in my experience in political communications, it's true, though. Like, you do have to take into consideration what you have on. But I always advise folks, the people who are the most powerful messengers are the ones who are the realest and that are the most relatable. So when you can tell, the American people can tell when, Glenn Youngkin is a perfect example, like, okay, you're worth a couple $100 million. I doubt that you're out on the farm in your Patagonia vest, like, working the land. You know, that's, like, not happening. But that, you know, his consultants felt as though this is going to make you relatable. People aren't going to think about the fact that you're worth a couple $100 million. And you watch these folks and they think that they're like, okay, no one's going to notice. But people notice. But some, it matters. For some, it doesn't. But I feel like there's a certain insincerity that goes along with that, where it's like, okay, if you're gonna wear, you know, don't wear your $7,000 dress to the union hall discussion, you know, like that probably wouldn't be a good idea, First Lady, you know. And I get that, but there shouldn't be such a calculation if it's not authentic, right? If it's practical, fine, but when it's inauthentic like that, you're trying to be something you're not. It's like almost putting on a costume. I think that it's insulting, almost. But then the flip side of that is that there's scrutiny. I remember a few years ago when Michelle Obama was First Lady, and the political topic was tax cuts. And they were talking about tax cuts for middle-class families and child tax credits and things like that. And people were getting, I think, $750 back or something. And she made a comment about, oh, well, you can go buy a pair of sneakers or a pair of earrings with that. And people were like, where do you live that you're spending if you get $750, that you're going to buy a pair of sneakers? And and then it was like a news story for a week that they're out of touch, they're elitist, and blah, blah, blah. And she didn't mean it, like in an elitist way, but that's how it was interpreted to people because, she had on like a $3,000 Sergio Hudson dress when she said it. So there's there's checks and balances to that. But I just think that as long as you're being your authentic self and you're not trying to be a caricature of something, or you're patronizing people, then it's fine to curate and be appropriate for what you're doing, but just be real about it.
I mean, I think the one thing that's interesting about clothing, right, is it's something that everybody can relate to because everybody wears it, right? Everybody gets up and they get dressed. They make some sort of decision about what they're putting on their body, and therefore they feel an ability to judge other people's dress. And in particular, when you're talking about figures that can seem very removed, with concerns that are sometimes not always what you are thinking about, it becomes the kind of easiest point of entry, right? It becomes the thing that connects you to the people you're seeing. And that is a really powerful sort of lens for connection.
And what impact is it having on voting? Voting.
I mean, I think it goes straight to that. I like this person, I don't like this person. I relate to this person, I don't relate to this person.
Mm-hmm. And how long, so we've talked about the fact that politicians and folks in the media are highly curated and there's all this effort happening behind the scenes. How new is this phenomenon?
So old, so old. I mean, honestly, this goes back to Cleopatra, right? Name a famous historical leader, and they were like, you can name their dress, right? Like Elizabeth I, Mao, Fidel Castro, Napoleon. Nelson Mandela had a shirt named after him because he wore it so much, right? It is an absolute human tool that has been important in politics forever.
And does it matter? So one of the things we want to focus on in this panel is gendered narratives. So as we think about reporting on what people are wearing and how they look, how important is it that we consider who is actually writing the story?
That's very important because obviously representation matters, perspective matters, life experience matters. It shapes the way that people write their stories and the language that they use, the descriptors that they use. I think it makes a huge difference. And we're seeing, women are still grossly underrepresented a lot in the media, but as we make inroads there, I think for women in particular, the way that they write those stories reflects the experience of being a woman and being judged and what they have on. I think if you look at the way Hillary Clinton was written about with the pantsuits and then that was at first it was something that was written negatively by men, and then she embraced it and it became the power suit, and so she was able to turn that around. And I think by having more women in positions of power in editorial rooms, with fashion magazines, embracing that and turning that around from being some type of negative thing into power and agency, I think it makes a huge difference who writes the story and from what perspective, 100%.
And I also think that, the more we talk about something, the more we de-weaponize it. Right, it's the sort of endless pushback, the refusal to engage with something allows, someone's opponent to use that against you. And you see that really with Mrs. Clinton was like a perfect example, because when she was First Lady, she was extremely irritated by people talking about her clothes, right? She really felt that it was demeaning, it was a way of making her seem less substantive. That is historically true. But she pushed back against it, and it became this sort of bone of contention and element of tension that sort of symbolized her discomfort with that role. When she ran for Senate, she developed her pantsuit uniform. It kind of became not a subject to talk about because she was wearing the same thing all the time. When she ran for president, she suddenly started using it. I don't know if you guys remember her first Instagram post. When she joined Instagram, it was a picture of her pantsuits, right? It was red, white, and blue pantsuits, and underneath it, she wrote hard choices. Yeah, it was brilliant. Whoever was advising her to do that was just it was brilliant. And then she made jokes about her hair, right? She was like, I'm the only president who's not gonna go gray in office because I dye my hair, and it went on from there. And suddenly it became a weapon for her, right? It couldn't be used against her, it was hers. And my feeling, as a woman who writes about this stuff, is that in fact, like the more we talk about it, the less of a kind of third rail it becomes, and the more we just acknowledge that this is something that everyone wrestles with every day when they're going out in public, and there are actual like positives to it. And in some ways, for women, I think having the amount of options that you have to get dressed in the morning means that you actually have a much bigger toolbox, much bigger arsenal than a man. And that is a good thing.
So you both work for very powerful media organizations. And as you think about those that are, and you allude to this, Tara, like those that are making editorial decisions, what you're covering, what you're not covering, how important is gender of the person who's making that decision?
Well, I mean, I would say now we've seen, well, I think it's pretty obvious that the answer is very important because you need to have diversity of perspective. When newsrooms were all men, women weren't represented. Women's stories weren't represented. When you don't have women making decisions, for example, I forget where the study was. I think it was Protect Democracy, but only 16% of news stories were covering women in government and power. That's it? Only 16% of the stories. I wonder who's making those decisions of what stories to cover. I don't think it's women saying, let's not cover this woman who is the head of this agency or the woman that's elected over here, or, I doubt that. So representation matters, and we will probably say that over and over and over again because it's true. Because when you have people that have the lived experience, they bring that perspective to it, and they are able to make sure that things are not uniform. Because and it's not just, again, just because you have a woman doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get women's perspectives either. You shouldn't be presumptive. But you would think that there is at least a lived experience that is brought to those decision-making, those decisions that wouldn't be there if there was not some gender equity in these newsrooms, for sure.
What would you add? Same.
I agree with that one entirely.
Okay, so let's stick with you, Vanessa, and switch gears a little bit. And we've talked so far about binary definitions of gender, men and women, but obviously there's more than that. And so how are you seeing different definitions of gender show up in the media? And how is the media treating individuals who don't fit in neatly into male or female buckets?
I mean, I think certainly if you're talking about politics, it is still very sort of binary. And what is interesting is what is changing in that. And I think for us, it's part of our job to highlight that, right? To talk about a broader definition, a more inclusive definition of everything we see, and to help readers sift through that and understand it.
Would you add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that just goes along with how, as a society, we are changing not only in those definitions, but even our definitions of families, definitions of certain social dynamics that are a reflection of the time, and that trickles down into the way media covers those things, the way the arts and entertainment are incredibly influential in this, and what's acceptable and what isn't. And so I think you're starting to see this is a kind of a new phenomenon now, but one that I think, as those of us who are in these spaces in media, and particularly, I think this is where arts and entertainment is, I think, in leading that, and then media is coming a little slower for that. But over the years, I mean, media and has such an oversized influence in cultural acceptance or non-acceptance of certain things that this is also being used politically too. We see the way certain news organizations cover this issue versus others. And that's influencing millions of people across the country in elections, all the way down to school board meetings and school curriculums and what you can say and what you can't. Just ask anyone who lives in Florida. I think that this is something that's evolving and changing as we speak.
But the thing is, no matter who the subject is, no matter what their gender identity is, the question is always essentially the same, right? It's like, who is this person? What are they wearing? Why are they wearing it? And what are they saying with it? How does that reflect who they are?
So we're getting a lot of questions that are coming in from the audience, so I'm going to stop mine and turn to those. And for those of you who are in the room or online, I do encourage you, we'll get to as many as we can. And some of these are really specific and interesting. So I'm going to, the first one, Vanessa, is for you. How has criticism changed over the course of your career thus far, both industry criticism and political image criticism?
So I actually do not have a traditional fashion background. I didn't study it. I didn't ever think I would be a fashion journalist. I never, it was not my intention. So I came at this job very sideways. And I think that's kind of why I write about what I write about. Like, I wanted to write about, I always thought I would write about identity, politics, society, culture. And I think that's what I do now. I just happen to do it through fashion. It took me a while to figure out I could use fashion to write about all these things. So in a funny way, I don't feel like my job has really changed. And I think of myself probably more as a cultural critic than a fashion critic necessarily. But I also think that that is true probably of all my peers. Also, whether they're at the Post or the Wall Street Journal, or, I think this area of criticism is growing, and that's a good thing. And maybe the more traditional, what we would think of as more traditional fashion criticism, like, wow, there's a lot of green skirts out, this month, is kind of moving to TikTok, which is fine.
So, Tara, you mentioned Senate fashion twice, yes. And you got a question about Senate fashion, which is, isn't there a rule that women cannot wear sleeveless dresses on the Senate floor? Where did that rule come from and when?
Yeah, so I'm not sure where that rule came from because I actually worked in the House side. So I'm not sure. The Senate has such Byzantine rules of all kinds of things that it's hard to keep up with that. But the idea of the sleeveless dresses, I would only assume that that is something from way back when, with the male patriarchy not wanting women, the exposure of women's skin being something that was unseemly. You can go back to things that are so ridiculous as even when the women's suffrage movement was going on and women started wearing bloomers to ride bicycles, right? The bikes and bloomers thing, and how that was like, oh my goodness, the women are wearing pants to ride bicycles because now they have freedom of movement, pearl clutch. And these women, they're out here and we don't know what they're up to because they're on their bicycles. It was like so absurd. So I'm sure it originated from some old 18th century disinformation propaganda about undermining women and their seriousness because of fashion. Now, to change the subject from the Senate back to sleeveless dresses, I'm sure everyone remembers when First Lady Michelle Obama decided to wear a sleeveless dress to the State of the Union. And then she would wear, because she had buff arms and she looked great and she wanted to be stylish and she went for that. And that was also something where people were saying how, that's, against tradition and that's not, it's tacky, whatever they said, it was horrible. Well, guess what? She said, oh, okay. And kept wearing her sleeveless dresses. Because she's First Lady, and she had the power to be able to do that. And I think that's a perfect example of where when you're in a position and you have representation, you can show that you can be classy, still show your arms, and be fashionable and powerful, and that does not diminish you in any way, shape, or form in those positions. So. Women in their arms, I tell you, it scares men.
They changed the Senate rule. I think it was in 2019 because of Kristen Sinema, specifically for her.
That's right. I forgot about that.
It was like, I think Amy Klobuchar was on the rules committee, and she said to her colleagues, like, this woman likes to wear sleeveless dresses. We should make her feel at home. We're going to change this rule. Huh. And they did it. And of course, the sky did not fall.
Correct.
Right? Nor in fact did everyone come in all the time in sleeveless dresses, which, talking about John Fetterman, remember that craziness when they decided to get rid of the non-existent rule that you actually had to wear a suit on the floor of the Senate chamber for him. And everyone was like, oh my God, the sky is going to fall. This is the worst thing. But the truth is, even though they then reinstated it, because they reinstated the rule that didn't exist before, I think the odds of anyone other than Fetterman coming in like shorts and a hoodie were probably like 0.01%. I mean, people love a uniform. They like to feel safe in their community and dress like the other guy. They're going to stay in suits. Like, Washington will be the last bastion of the suit and tie in this entire country. Promise.
That's probably true.
So you will not be surprised, none of you will be, that we got a question about high heels. And the question is, given the negative personal health impact of high heels, and I want to go to you first, Vanessa, how is it that powerful women are still wearing high heels and expected to wear high heels?
I've had a lot of questions like this, not just here. High heels are a personal choice, I would say. I mean, I don't think there are that many women in Washington who are wearing super high heels, because they can be very hard to walk in, and if you are like doing a filibuster, really like not a good idea. But I think there is also something to the feeling of being taller, right? And if you are in a position where you feel somewhat disempowered, you feel more powerful when you're taller. And I know I do it. When I go and I'm out in sort of big groups, especially if I think I'm going to be around a lot of people who are men taller than me, I will wear like a really high-heeled, chunky-heeled boot, because it like lets me stomp around, and that makes me feel more confident. And that really is what clothing should do, right? Like, it should make you feel like yourself, it should make you feel confident, it should make you feel secure. It should do all these things that allow you to be a better version of whoever you want to be in that moment. And, if a high heel does that for you, on balance, maybe it's okay.
So I'm actually going to add to that. As someone who worked on Capitol Hill for 7 years and ran around in 4 to 5 inch heels all the time, I paid the price for that and had 2 knee surgeries in 2015, which is partially why I wear my Uggs now. I love my high heels because I'm short. I'm only 5'6", 5'5". And so it's true that, you do have a certain feeling of being taller, and especially as a woman when you're in male-dominating professions like politics, there's a lot of posturing, and it's usually the smallest men who do it. So, but sometimes you have to just establish your presence. But I didn't feel like obligated to do it. It was a personal choice. Like I said, I paid the price for it for years of doing that, wearing them too much. But, sometimes I do feel like when we go out to events and things, and I see heel, and I go to shoe shopping, and I see these nice big heels, and I'm like, I can't wear them anymore. But it's as you get older, you learn how to adjust. It's okay. So I get sparkly like little flats, and it still makes me good because they sparkle. So if it's not the height, it's the sparkle. But again, it's a personal choice. But on another side to that, the idea of feeling taller, and for women sometimes feeling disempowered, for the more diminutive women, in stature, just they can't help how they were born. One of my colleagues, she's 5 feet tall, and she is tough. She's a tough New Yorker, small but mighty, right? And she said to me recently, we just had this conversation where she said that she has felt that she was disrespected, not taken as seriously because she was short. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I never really thought about that, but I can see, because people, they look over her, she's over there. And meanwhile, she was in a very powerful position and would have to assert herself. She'll wear heels to bring her up to my height, right? 5'5", 6'6", and she'll wear so that just so she can be seen. And I never really thought about that, but that's a thing. It's a real thing, and the struggle is real for the small but mighties out there. So thank God for heels.
So we're getting a number of questions that people want to get to know the two of you a little bit better. So I'm going to start with you, Vanessa. Someone points to your background in history, and they want to know how that informs your writing and how you got into fashion in the first place.
I got into fashion entirely by mistake. I was in magazines. So I graduated from college with a degree in history. I thought maybe I'd be a lawyer. Then I thought maybe I'd do magazines. I decided I'd do magazines first because you don't really become a middle-aged editorial assistant. And so I was in magazines in New York. I was at Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, and then I worked at Vogue. But when I was at Vogue, I was doing mostly culture. So I was writing about arts, books, theater, whatever. Went to Elle, moved to England, and was freelancing in London, and sent a cold, probably handwritten letter at that point, or typed letters, it was a while ago, to the Financial Times. And the woman there saw I had worked at Vogue, assumed that meant I was a fashion person, and said, "Will you write about boots?" And I was sitting in a loft in Kentish Town by myself, and I was like, "I will write about tire treads if you will pay me." So that was my first fashion story.
Wow.
And then I kind of like faffed around for a while and ended up being their first, the FT's first fashion editor. And what was really lucky about that is the newspaper sort of knew that fashion mattered to their readers, kind of, and they liked, it was becoming a big industry, so it had big financial implications, but they really didn't have any strong feelings about it. And so they were like, "Okay, you go do that." They weren't paying any attention to me. And fashion didn't know that the FT was covering it, because it never really had before, so they weren't paying any attention to me. So I essentially had 2 years to make tons of mistakes and figure out what I thought it meant, in the context of a newspaper that people were coming to not to read about fashion, right? There are people who wore clothes, that fashion played a role in their life, but it was not the reason that they were picking up this paper. And so I decided it was really a way to explain all the other forces that were shaping their lives. And that's kind of how I write about what I write about. And I think history just informs that, because someone said to me once, if you study history, you can do anything because everything has been done.
How about you? How did you find your way here?
Oh my goodness, which here?
National political commentator.
Yeah, okay. Well, like I said, did I mention I'm from Jersey? We have an opinion in New Jersey. It's in my DNA. Listen, from the time I was a kid, I was raised by a single mom. My mom had me at 21, and it was just her and I, and she was always very encouraging in making sure that I asserted myself. I asked questions. If she didn't know the answer, we'd find out together. She always encouraged me to speak up, and even speak up when others wouldn't. And so from the time I was in elementary school, I was kind of always that person that would speak for others who didn't have the confidence to, or stand up for things when others were afraid to. Because my mom lived in New York City. My mom was in theater and in show business, and she would tell me stories. And she said, never be afraid to get involved, because she saw horrible things happen in New York City with people deciding that they weren't going to get involved. And she said, don't ever be that person. So from the time I was young, that was instilled in me, that if I saw something that wasn't right, then I would speak up and I would get involved. And she taught me very young to never feel as though my opinion or my voice was lesser than anybody else's because I was a woman or a woman of color. I'm biracial, by the way, so I get it from both sides. And that's okay. It gives me a different perspective on different things. But from the time I was young, I just was unapologetically me. And that led me to politics, because I saw lots of things that could be better, and I saw lots of people that felt that they needed the boost in confidence to get engaged or speak up or make a difference or change things. And so I went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C. I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be at the epicenter of politics in D.C., because we're better to change things than where laws and things like that are made. So in 1993, I went to George Washington University and pretty much never left Washington. I did go back to Jersey for a couple of years. I got a TV job in New York, so it required that I move back to Jersey, and that was great. But then my husband's career brought us back to Washington, which was okay with me too, because I have a love-hate relationship with DC. It'll always be where I live, but I'm from Jersey. And so, but yeah, that being able to be honest and get involved in debates and tell people, I guess I got the reputation of telling it like it is, and I'm like, I'm just telling the truth, so I don't know why that's something that should be novel. But in this day and age, right, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. So I don't mind being a general in that revolution and bringing other people with me and inspiring them to stand up and speak out and be part of that. So that's kind of how I got there. Because when you're honest and you to call people out on their BS, it catches people's attention. And not only did I have that skill, but I also knew a lot about a lot of things in public policy and cared about them. So I was able to communicate that in a way that was relatable. And that caught the eye of cable news networks. And the first time I was ever on cable news was back in 1998, commentating on Bill Clinton's impeachment. Wow. And I was a college student, just graduated from college, and I was in the green room, and I was pretty nervous, but I was just like, okay, it's just like having a conversation. And the two women who were in the green room with me were talking amongst themselves, and they were like, I wonder who else is gonna be on? Who's gonna take the other position? And I just sat there very quietly. And then when we got on set, they didn't know what hit them. So you learn these things where people underestimate you sometimes in this business, but you learn to sometimes you need to just listen. I knew everything they were gonna say on air before we went on air. And I was like, they'll never make that mistake again. But it kind of just started from there, really. Just people knew, you may not agree with me, but you know I'm coming from an honest place, and you know I'll back it up with fact. And that kind of became my brand. And I'm grateful to CNN for giving me the opportunity to be a commentator there for 6 years. And I had no idea at the time that I would be one of the most vocal, never Trump Republicans in the country at a time where so many others were silent and cowards. So I'm grateful for that opportunity, and the rest is history.
So since you mentioned Mr. Trump, we do have a question about him, and Vanessa, I'll go to you first. The question is, they would love to hear your opinion on Mr. Trump's iconic image. What does it say about gender and politics and his target audience?
I mean, it is an incredibly effective image, right? Like he's like his own emoji. Like you can close your eyes, right? And like you know exactly what he is. And he is also, and I'm gonna write about this, so don't write about it too. He has effectively dressed himself up as the flag, right? Like when he poses and there's like that entire forest of flags behind him, like literally the whole wood is there. He matches, right? The tie, the shirt, the jacket. He essentially is appropriating that kind of image, right, of patriotism for himself, which, by the way, is like a real sort of fascist dictator thing to do, right? Historically, like appropriating the trappings of a country, associating it with you is like a basic pageant trope for dictators. And I think, so I think it's very, very effective. He is good at this. He knows how to do this, right? Like he's a TV guy. He understands the power of image. He understands how to play it. He understands how important it is. The power of repetition, right? Like you wear the same thing over and over and over again and you own it, right? Other people can't wear it. You remember that the first Republican debate, the like very brief first Republican debate this time around, where like every single Republican, male Republican candidate was wearing his uniform. They all look like these little mini-me's. You're like, and so like, and you look at them and all you could think was Trump, and he wasn't even there. So I think.
And what did Nikki Haley do? She
stood out.
Completely different to stand out.
Yeah.
What would you add about Mr. Trump?
Oh, God. Well, I would say that the idea that perception is reality, he's the personification of that. Because for his followers, he has created this perception of a tough guy, of someone who's in control, of a wealthy, successful businessman. And we all know that that is BS. And if you don't believe me, you can just look at him coming out of the courtroom every day looking deflated, diminished, and disheveled, because he can't control his image when he's sitting in a courtroom for 6 or 7 hours a day. And all that goes into that. He can't do it all to maintain it while he's sitting there in court all day. So when you talk about the emperor has no clothes, in a situation like this, he's being exposed for what he isn't because he can't control it. So for years, he's been building up this image on The Apprentice and, highly produced, all of that. I mean, all the way down to the makeup he shellacks on his face, which is funny to me because if any woman wore makeup as bad as Donald Trump's, she would never be taken seriously. And the hair, exactly. But that's become a thing. I mean, Michael Cohen talks about it in his book, the whole flip, flap, flop, he calls it. There's a whole couple pages about it. And Trump takes pride in this. But if a woman behaved the way that Trump did, the way he presents himself and his appearance, do you think she'd have a shot at being president of the United States? Never, never. So it goes back to that double standard as well, where it's just the absolute ridiculousness and how asinine his presentation actually is, but he gets away with it, and millions of people look at him and think that this is someone who represents them and is a voice for them. The cognitive dissonance of the Donald Trump image and the people who support him is something that I think academics will write volumes about long after we're all dead and gone, because it's a fascinating phenomenon.
Anything else to add there?
I mean, I would say the other thing that's really interesting about Trump, right, is the mugshot image, right? Like that picture, which he clearly had practiced, right? Like they knew that was coming.
He hired consultants for it, because I know the people who were, they did. You laugh, but it's true. There it is. Oh, there it is. Oh, God, no wonder. Yes, he hired consultants to teach him and coach him on that image right there. And
yeah.
That's what he went with, and seems to think that that's wonderful.
Right, but and literally overnight, his team, as well as the Lincoln Project, had used that image, right, on all different kinds of merch. I mean, if you look at Etsy, there's hundreds, thousands of items with that image on it, right? It is absolutely a historical picture. And now, if you look at him, when they bring the photographers in court at the very beginning of each day, he's sort of hunched over doing that face. It's his character.
And that's the face, speaking of the media, that's the shot that we see plastered on our cable news networks all day long, all day. So we complain about it, but yet there it is. And talk about weaponizing or turning it around, he's making money off of it. Yes, the Lincoln Project did make fun of it, and we did sell a set of shot glasses with that face on there, but also with the mug shots of his other co-conspirators who were criming, kind of as a joke about it. But yeah, that those images. But here's something, and I wanted to get an opportunity to do this because at the Lincoln Project we specialize in ads and communicating in imagery. Donald Trump, as important as he feels image is, and he doesn't like to be ridiculed, right? Yet he carries himself that way. What does he expect? We're going to talk about it. But he doesn't have a problem ridiculing women and how women look and going after women who he thinks are lesser than. And in this election cycle, as women, I firmly believe, will be the saviors of democracy if we get out there and vote the way we should, because our lives literally depend on it. Lincoln Project put together an ad, it's called This Year, where it talks about women, their relationships with their dads, and the way that they are seen. And I wanted an opportunity to show that, because I think it's important when you have someone like Donald Trump who's so worried about image. We actually have two, if we can show them back to back. This Year and Girl in the Mirror, if you're able to play them.
Hi, Dad. Thank you. You've always taken on the hard jobs and never complained. You didn't sign up for half the things you did. You just did it for me. You protected me, taught me, and guided me. I haven't said this since I was little, but I'm scared, Dad. I'm scared to send the kids off to school or to go to church. Your granddaughter is scared that her teacher's going to be fired for reading her the wrong book. And I'm scared that my health is going to be decided by a room full of men that you and I have never met. You've always been there for me, Dad, even when we disagree. And so I'm asking you to do the hard thing one more time. This election, will you vote to protect me, to protect my daughter, and every daughter
Imagine a young girl looking in the mirror, searching for role models in the world to give her hope that one day she too can make a difference. Now imagine how she feels when she watches women being verbally attacked.
What a stupid question that is. What a stupid question. But I watch you a lot. You ask a lot of stupid questions.
Maligned.
And this monster that was on stage with Mike Pence, who destroyed her last night, by the way.
Belittled.
I'm not thinking, Mr.
That's
President.
okay. I know you're not thinking. You never do.
I'm sorry?
Harassed.
Blood coming out of her, wherever.
Insulted.
And I'd look her right in that fat, ugly face of hers. I'd say,
Your daughters are listening and absorbing that message right in front of your eyes. Now imagine a different future for her. A future with a president who doesn't just value a female voice, but chooses one to be his right-hand woman. A strong woman. A woman with compassion. A woman unafraid to take on a bully.
And I want to add, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking.
A woman who not only believes in the American dream, she embodies it. Imagine that little girl in the mirror, because that little girl is yours. And your actions on November 3rd will define who she sees. Vote for change. Vote for her. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Thank you.
So those ads nicely lead into a couple of questions I wanted to ask that we're getting actually on stereotypes. And the question is, have gender stereotypes gotten positive over time as opposed to just being negative? And that's sort of picked up by all the images of the dads in that first video. Do you want to take that one first, Tara, and then you, Vanessa?
Sure. Yes. I mean, I think that, stereotyping, objectification, sexualization, those are all things that are used for disinformation and propaganda against women and have for generations. And when you slap down those stereotypes, I think it empowers women, and it empowers even us. It empowers men too, because you don't want men to keep looking at girls or as lesser than, or there's certain buckets they're supposed to be in. No, this is a whole new time. And we are not lesser than, and we do have our relationships with our dads. How dads relate to their daughters, I think, is going to be something that comes up even more in this election cycle, because for the first time in American history, women have lost a right and are trying to fight to get that back. And men will play a role in that because they are fathers. We call them Dobbs dads at the Lincoln Project. These are real, particularly millennials, who are looking at their daughters and going, wait a minute, I don't want them growing up in a world that existed 100 years ago. That's not what I want. That's not the future I want for my daughter. So yeah, I think absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's about redefining stereotypes so that, Tara brought up Michelle Obama. One of the, this sounds ridiculous, but one of the extraordinary things she did as First Lady was wear a lot of dresses. Right, up until then, First Ladies almost always wore skirt suits. Right, because skirt suits were the thing that you wore that was it's sort of masculine, but it was sort of feminine, and it was, it wasn't too sexy or flirty or feminine, right? But it was feminine enough. And she essentially was able to say, I am powerful enough in myself and strong enough in myself to wear a dress and not have that make me seem like fluffy or diminished or anything else. And when you have someone like that, in that position, as Tara said, when you have someone who can, representing, who can do that, it then opens up a whole realm of possibilities for other people to do similar things. And then suddenly, dresses don't seem necessarily fluffy, whatever. You can be a CEO, you can dress the way you want, and it doesn't make you seem less powerful or effective. And I think that is incredibly important, which is also why I think actually talking about clothes is important. The more that all of this stuff becomes less stereotyped in that very old-fashioned, that's the province of women over there, it's superficial, it's silly way, the better for everybody of any gender.
I think it also, another example of how you know that things are changing, is if you look at some of the very regressive commentary out there coming from the right and from the religious right, they're trying to criticize and diminish women and how they look and their behavior taking us back to a time where women weren't as powered as they are now. And our foreign enemies, as I deal a lot in disinformation, they're picking up on that and trying to perpetuate those stereotypes that the far right is putting back out, these antiquated, like I said, repressive images of what women are supposed to be. And you're hearing this, and that's starting to gain traction on the other side, because there is an intersection between democracy and democracy being undermined, and women and women's rights and women's roles in democracy. There's a nexus there. And we're starting to see that. As our democracy is under attack, you see women's rights are under attack, women's positions in society are under attack from a certain element of it. And it's social media, TikTok you brought up. Our enemies know where our pressure points are culturally. So for those of you who have young kids, or for those of you who are on those platforms, pay attention to those algorithms, because they're doing that for a reason, to perpetuate those stereotypes, or to bring us back to a point where women are powerful women, or women who are succeeding or advancing or in positions of power. Somehow that's not a woman's place anymore. I mean, we're hearing language that's coming out from that we haven't heard in 50, 60 years. And that's not the direction I want to go in, that's for sure.
So we only have a couple minutes left, and I'm going to put you both on the hot seat. So I'm going to tell you both questions, so you have a chance to think about it for a second. One is your perspective, and one is more personal. So the perspective is, when it comes to fashion and curating an image, who does it best? And the other question, these are coming through the chat here, is when you get dressed in the morning, or when you got dressed for today, what was going through your mind, and what are you trying to make sure you communicate?
Oh my goodness. Well, I have on Uggs, so I really wasn't thinking about it that hard, other than I have to walk. So it's about comfort. Vanessa, you have to go first.
Who does it best? I actually think in the recent cycle, like Nikki Haley did it extremely well, and is another example of somebody who, took fashion and turned it to her own ends, right? I mean, she's endlessly talking about heels, and she'll say it takes a woman to I wear them so I can kick people, who are against me more powerfully, or I can do this. She's always joking about them, but she did absolutely use clothing to underscore her difference, right, in a field of all male candidates, of many very far right conservative candidates. She was a much more balanced figure, and all you had to do was look at her to see someone different, right, and that was kind of her sell. So she used her clothing to underline her message. Right? There was a real kind of integrity and authenticity, something Tara brought up, to how she dressed and what she was trying to get people to understand about herself, right? What her sell was. So, I was really impressed by that.
And how about you personally?
And how am I dressing? Well, I came up on the train yesterday, and I was like, I need essentially a small bag that I can carry on my shoulder. So what can I wear 2 days in a row, pretty much, that carries, that won't wrinkle, and and is comfortable, and the weather's kind of weird, I don't know, and also I tend to wear the same thing for it's been 20 years now, mostly because I don't want to think about it that much, and I don't want it to be the story.
Right. Who do I think is doing it the best? I will say our First Lady. I think Dr. Jill Biden is an example of class and grace and realism, and in the polar opposite of what we had before. And she's just, she gives you a sense of comfort. Because she comes from an education background, so she understands certain efficacy of what she wears when she wears it. I was saying, context matters. She's not afraid to wear designer, but she's also not afraid to wear, clothes that any of us would wear. She's a girl from Philly, and she exudes all of those things. So I think that Dr. B is our wonderful First Lady. I think she's doing it great. And she's the perfect complement to President Biden in a lot of ways. And I think that comes across, and it's inspiring to women of all ages. So that's my answer on that. And then what did I think about this morning? I mean, same thing. It's about, well, if I'm gonna be on stage, am I wearing a mic? Do I need to worry about, I was like, do we have handhelds? Do we have lavaliers? Does that matter? Because if you wear a dress, he's gotta go up and under, and then if can I wear a jacket? Can I wear something flowy? What can I put on, throw on after the plane? So, in a situation like today, luckily we're in an environment where we could be, fashionable. I had to think of something. I refused to wear a blazer because I was like, I had one. I had my Calvin Klein blazer, and I said, no, I'm not wearing a blazer today. I'm not. I will wear whatever this is called. I don't even know. But it looked cool to me, and it's comfortable, and I figured, why not? So I don't put as much as effort into it on certain things when we're having conversations like this, because I think, like you said, in journalism, you don't want to become the story, and I didn't want us to become what we had on necessarily become the story.
Please join me in thanking Tara and Vanessa. So we're at the end of today's wonderful symposium. Yeah, please go ahead, Steph. Yeah, thanks. And, we have learned a lot over the past 2 days about the intersection of gender and politics. And this is such an important conversation as we approach the 2024 election here in the United States, and as there are elections happening all around the world. I want to take a few moments, just offer some reflections about yesterday evening and then the day that we've had together. So, at the keynote yesterday, Governor Healy, she talked about the importance of diverse gender representation in elected office, saying that it often brings a missing lens. And she went on to say that if you're in these positions, you need to use your power. And that is a message we have heard over and over again today through the various panels. We heard from 3 trailblazers in the field, Ruth C., Dallas, and Rochelle. And they each shared powerful, often very personal experiences that really lifted up key themes and highlighted this complex relationship between gender and politics. We heard about the importance of leaning into difficult conversations, being willing to talk to people that don't agree with you, surrounding yourself with people that are going to challenge you, and leveraging anger as a powerful motivator to try to make change. And throughout the panels, we heard, how do you get involved in politics? How do you make your voice heard? And then we just had a wonderful discussion about, and what is the role of media in gendered narratives? And so some of the things that stood out for me in those panels are that having women at the table really matters. Having different perspectives across the gender spectrum at the table really matters. Because without that lived experience, without that expertise, you're not going to have all the right voices making the decision. We also heard that to be a leader, you don't have to be elected. You can do it in small ways, you can do it in big ways, but you don't need a giant platform. Sometimes it can happen right at home. And then we also heard that we need to be bold, that we need to speak up, and we need to stand up. And I would say, thinking across the past day and yesterday evening, there are really a few things that stood out to me. One is the importance of listening hard to hear what is possible. Another is that failure is part of this journey. We are all going to make mistakes, and when we do, we have to learn from them and move on. A third is that if you want to make a difference, you have to take care of yourself first and then go on to help others. The fourth, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, is to understand your purpose and to know your power. And then finally, using Dallas's words, it's really important that we all have hope throughout this process. So I want to close by thanking Dean Tamika Brown-Nagin for hosting us for this Gender and Politics Conference. I want to give a huge thank you to the moderators and the panelists and the Women in Public Policy Program for co-sponsoring today's event. I want to really thank you all, the audience, for your insightful questions. We got to as many as we possibly could. I want to thank the Radcliffe staff. Every event here is run perfectly and smoothly, and there's an enormous amount of work happening behind the scenes to make that possible. And I want to wish you all a wonderful weekend. So thank you.